Well, when it gets hot out, my number one bait is probably a topwater frog. It's one of the most fun baits to fish, and it really gets into that nasty overhead cover like those lily pads, even along docks. And when the fish are in the right mood and the weather's hot, man, it is the best frog bite of the year, hands down. So number one's gonna be a frog. Throw it on a real heavy rod and throw it with 50 to 80 pound braid so that when you get a bite, you can really rip those fish out of there and not get tangled up in the weeds. And you'll have an absolute blast fishing in the summertime with that bait. Now my number two summer bait is going to be a Senko. Senkos are absolutely irresistible to bass, and they are the best lure for skipping up under docks in my opinion. Not only do they skip well, you can flick them across the surface and they just hop right across the surface and get way up under those docks, but they also are a slow falling bait, so that bait just comes down and the tail ends kind of wiggle, and bass just have a long time to see that thing floating down in front of them. If you use a heavier bait, it drops quicker and they don't have as much time to hit it before it hits the bottom. So a weightless Senko or just like a 1/16 ounce jig is a great way to catch bass in the summertime, and you can use it around other cover too. I mean, I've let them fall on deep weed lines. I've cast them out over even deeper cribs if the fish are finicky, and you can catch fish almost anywhere on a Senko. So that's bait number two. Okay, bait number three is actually kind of two baits. So it's either going to be a swim jig or a swim bait. Swim jigs I'm typically going to use in more thicker vegetation areas, so really thick weeds along the edges of lily pad beds, that kind of thing, where I need that bait to really snake through some nasty tangles. A swim bait on a jig head I'm going to use over the top of deeper weed beds. So if I've got weeds coming up 3 or 4 feet off the bottom and a bunch of open water above it, I can swim that swim bait on a heavy jig head right over the tops of those weeds, and fish will rock it out from below and grab it. So those are both great options if you want a swimming bait in the middle of summertime. And man, it is an absolute blast when you get that thunk on a big swim bait. When they hit those things, they do not mess around. So that's bait number three. All right, bait number four is going to be a drop shot rig with some sort of finesse worm. I've caught so many fish on deep structure on this particular setup. So when you got those fish moving offshore onto cribs and trees and brush piles, you can finesse this thing around the edges of that brush. And I love a 6-inch robo worm in Aaron's Magic. That's like my top largemouth bass drop shot bait. Another great one is the Billy Rub 4-inch hot shot. Both of those I've caught tons of fish on in the summertime. And you can also drop shot off the edges of deep weeds. That can be a great way to catch fish in the summer. Those deep weeds hold tons of fish, and they can be really hard to catch sometimes on bigger baits, but you put that finesse worm in front of them and it's game over. So that's number four, a drop shot rig. All right, and finally number five is going to be a punching rig. So this is some sort of bulky, big, heavy plastic with lots of appendages on it. Typically it's got about a 1 ounce tungsten weight on it, and that's designed to get down through that nasty mat of vegetation when those fish are hanging in there under the shade. It's a kind of an alternative method to catch those fish when they're not on the frog bite and they want to be eating something underwater, not on the surface. So if those fish are in the nasty cover, you got to get down to them. It takes a heavy weight and a big bait to kind of get in there and drop in their face. And you got to use a really heavy rod for this, so I recommend an extra heavy and heavy braid. Similar setup for frogging, but also tie straight braid so that when you rip that fish out of there, you can rip through those lily pads and weeds and get those fish out. So get out there, have fun. I'll leave another video for you right here. Thanks for watching. Get hooked up.